Thanks again, everybody, for coming out tonight to learn more about the environment and issues in our state with NC Policy Watch reporter Lisa Sorg and Representative Terence Everitt. I'm Susan Blunt, one of the co-directors of Neighbors on Call, and Becca Zirkin, the other co-director and founder of Neighbors on Call, is there too. Now, before we turn the program over to the panel, just in case any of you are new, let me just tell you a few key things about Neighbors on Call. Neighbors on Call, or NOC, as we often call it, is an all-volunteer organization focused exclusively on electing Democrats to the North Carolina State Legislature. In fact, Representative Everitt's seat is one of the ones we are fighting to hold on to. But you may be wondering, with so many other important races going on this year, there's going to be the Senate race and a new congressional district and so on, why is it that we're focused on the North Carolina legislature? Let me just tell you that prior to the 2018 election, the Republicans had a supermajority and thus a stranglehold on the legislature, rendering the governor's veto powerless. But think, without the governor's veto, women's reproductive rights here in North Carolina could easily be like they are in Texas, or we could have voter suppression laws like they have in Georgia, or worse. North Carolina Republicans already have those bills drafted and ready and are just waiting for the right moment to introduce them. But in the election of 2018, Neighbors on Call helped break the supermajority in the state legislature, giving the veto back to the governor. And thank goodness he's been able to use it. We cannot lose that ground. We must not let the Republicans regain a supermajority. We must not let the governor lose his veto again. Plus, we want to move beyond this defensive posture and regain the majority so that our legislature can focus on issues that we all care about, like quality of environment, water quality, clean air, and so on. So you may wonder then, what are NOC's plans for the rest of 2022? So we will continue to focus our efforts on electing Democrats to the state legislature by talking to voters at their doors and on the phone. Our approach is strategic. We focus only on a few districts where the races are close, where we know that Neighbors on Call can make a difference. Right now, that includes 3 incumbents. You see them there on the slide. And after the primary, we will expand our slate. Within those districts, we are talking to a targeted slice of voters. The campaigns generally have us talking to left-leaning voters who maybe don't always actually vote. These legislative seats will be won or lost by small margins. Your work in these districts could swing an election. It has in the past. For instance, Ricky Hurtado, shown here, when he won last time, it's by 477 votes. So a few votes can make a huge difference. All right, now when it comes to talking to voters, it's okay to be nervous about it. I certainly myself was nervous when I first started campaigning. So NOC offers supports to make this all more comfortable for you. First of all, you'll always have training. You'll have a script and a targeted voter contact list. So they'll tell you who to go see. And at the kickoff, for whether it's a canvas or a phone bank, you'll get to meet the candidate, which has really been a great part of this for me. It helps me feel good about what I'm doing. NOC will provide support too. We always have a point person present so that if you have questions or needs, you can talk to the point person. You will always canvass with a partner. You don't have to go out by yourself. And we have a silent canvasser option, which means if you want to go and you want to have a way to be part of the team, but you're uncomfortable with talking, someone else will take you along and they do the talking and you can do the data entry into beloved minivan. So that'll be good. At the same time, if you're phone banking, it's kind of hard to be a silent phone banker. So we have a phone bank buddy option, somebody who will be on the call, who will be there to answer your questions about how to do this, how to do that, what should I say if this and that. So those things will make a big difference. You've got this, you can do this. I confess to having been among the initial reluctant, and I got where I could do it. In fact, I kind of like canvassing. I think it's fun to get out. So you can sign up for canvasses and phone banks on our website. They're always posted, the upcoming things. You can always sign up there. And at the Later on in this meeting, we'll also be showing you the list of upcoming activities that you can sign up for. So at this point, I will turn it over to Becca.
Hi, everybody. I'm Becca Zirkin. I'm the other co-director of Neighbors on Call. Thank you so much for being here. And let's welcome our guests. Lisa Sorg is here. She's an assistant editor and environmental reporter at NC Policy Watch. She reports on environmental issues, including social justice, pollution, climate change, and energy policy. Before joining NC Policy Watch, Lisa was the editor and investigative reporter for Indie Week, covering the environment, housing, and city government. And we're so grateful that you're here with us tonight, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Terence Everitt represents House District 35 in Northeastern Wake County. He flipped that seat in 2018 and was reelected in 2020. He has a law practice in Wake Forest that represents small businesses. He's a champion for environmental protection, clean energy, and holding polluters accountable. We're very grateful to have him in the legislature, and we need him to stay there. Welcome, both of you, and Representative Everitt. I'm handing it off to you. Thank you for leading this discussion.
Thank you. First, I want to just thank everyone for being on the call and taking time out of your evening to be with us. I do need to correct Becca on one thing. She said that I won this seat back in 2018. We won this seat back in 2018. I fully believe that this seat was not ours without your all's support. It's incredibly important. It will remain incredibly important so long as this is as competitive as it is. But the work is vital and it makes a difference. It makes a difference not only in this district, but the people we get to help throughout the state. So I just want to start by thanking you all. Next, I want to thank Lisa. I spoke with her earlier today and I made a confession. I told her I was going to say this publicly, but I needed her to know this. I probably know about as much as I do because of my reading of Lisa's work. She is just an incredible source of information, and I have, without her knowing it, relied on her for several years now. And you know, I think that's one of those unspoken things from legislators, that we rely on people like Lisa Sorg, and they don't get the credit they deserve. But they take complex issues and dumb it down enough for someone like me to understand. And it's just incredibly important. And I am honored to be on the phone. To be on this call with you all with her. We're going to talk about a few of the environmental issues. And Lisa and I talked about this earlier. We're going to end it with some upbeat, what can we do? Because it's not always the happy talk when we're talking about the current state of North Carolina environmental justice. But it is so important to understand what we're dealing with, what the realities are, to truly appreciate how important this work is. So with that, Lisa, do you want to start off with anything before I start leading you down a path?
Well, just to thank everybody for attending tonight. There's every day there is just another environmental story to pursue. Literally, it's like drinking from a fire hose. But it's important work, and it's important that regular citizens know what's going on in their community, because the legislature has power to make stronger state laws and to empower DEQ and to empower the Environmental Management Commission. So it's, it's not a lost cause, but it takes constant vigilance. And that includes, water quality issues, air, landfills, energy, stuff that, you may drive by and not even know that that's a polluted area. I think one issue that came out in a few years ago in Wake Forest, for example, was the Stony Hill TCE site, which I can get into in a little bit, but nobody knew that was there for years and years. And then people's drinking water was contaminated. And that's just, that's in Wake Forest. So I look forward to talking about the issues and of course, answering any questions.
I thought, we could start with folks' favorite topic, especially at the kitchen table, hog farms and hog.
Yes.
We've got, 35-1 is the North Carolina hog to person ratio.
There's a lot of hogs. There are 2,200 farms. I'm sorry, you're hearing my own livestock, which are my cats. So I'll just apologize. They're leaping. It's their Zoom time, their Zoomy time. And I think it was something like the number of hogs do outnumber the residents of North Carolina. Yes.
And I think it's somewhere around 10 billion, gallons of waste a year.
Yes.
And so when we're talking about that much waste, what are the implications of that? How does that impact not just the folks locally, but in a larger area?
Sure. Well, first of all, the way the hog farms are managed, I'm talking about the confined animal feeding operations. These are not pasture-raised hogs. These are hogs that are jammed into a barn where they live their whole lives on concrete. So what happens is their waste flows through these slats into the bottom of the barn, which then is flushed into these gigantic lagoons. And when I say gigantic, I'm talking like football field sized lagoons. And all that waste just sits there for decades. And then it's lowered over time by spray fields. So they spray the waste onto these fields to grow like Bermuda grass or something. The problem is that these lagoons, they're clay lined. They leak into the groundwater. They breach during hurricanes. Sometimes they breach simply because the farmer doesn't take care of his or her lagoon. The spray field then sprays this waste onto the fields, which also contaminates the groundwater. It can also contaminate near neighbors. So people who live next to these spray fields can get, basically hog waste on the sides of their houses. If they, open their windows, presumably it could go in their house. It can, hanging laundry on the line is out of the question. And if you've driven down 40 or 95 at certain times of the year, especially when it's humid, the stench it knocks you down. And the closer you are to the farm, the worse it is. So you have air quality issues and you have water quality issues. And most of the people who live the closest to these farms are people of color or low income. And this, is hogs, but also even in the Wake Forest and Wake County is mostly in the Neuse River Basin. So the Neuse River is polluted by animal waste, some failing septic systems, urban runoff, agricultural runoff, even microplastics have been found in the Neuse River Basin. So Falls Lake, all of that is at risk from this kind of, the hog farm industry and the Farm Bureau like to say they're very stringently regulated. Well, that is not true. They're regulated, but I would not call it stringent. The other thing to think about is that poultry farms often are co-located on hog farms. Those farms are pretty much unregulated. You don't even have to tell the public that a poultry farm exists unless if it's called dry litter, which basically means they put the waste under a barn and they don't put it, it's not wet, so to speak, but it does rain and it can run through the barn and run into the waterways. But the only people who know where all those poultry farms are is the Department of Agriculture, and that is not public record. So I could not tell you. You'd have to do a flyover and count the different kinds of barns to know remotely how many poultry farms there are.
And when we're talking about, the regulations and enforcement of regulations, the EPA is in charge of promulgating these regulations, but the actual enforcement comes down to the states.
Right.
And in North Carolina, that's where we're running into the problem, because there's no incentive for the folks in charge to enforce EPA regulations.
Right, and state law has, I'll give you an example. This was not even an EPA reg. This was something that was crafted by lawmakers who get a lot of money from the Farm Bureau, get a lot of money from Smithfield, and that regards nuisance lawsuits. Several years ago, a lot of people down east sued Smithfield because the way they even though the farmer might be an individual, Smithfield dictates every bit of how that farm is run, down to the amount of feed and how the lagoon is managed, and what they do with the dead animals. It's all very, very micromanaged. So a bunch of people down east, hundreds of people, sued Smithfield for nuisance, saying the stench, the flies, the water quality, all of that is lowering our property values, and it's affecting our quality of life in a bad way. These went to federal court, and all the residents won, and the juries awarded huge damages again, or ruled in favor of the residents, and a lot of damages, compensatory and punitive. I mean, it was a big deal. That was Smithfield appealed to the Fourth Circuit up in Virginia. The Fourth Circuit, I'm telling you, they came out with an opinion that it was crazy. They went and just lambasted Smithfield. So Smithfield lost big time. Well, since they were losing in the courts, they had to go to the legislature. So now, over several farm bills, several cycles, there's a farm bill every session. But now it's virtually impossible to file a nuisance suit against a hog farm. And that's because, and on the Senate and House floors, they said, we are doing this because Smithfield is losing in court. So we don't like the way the judges and the juries are deciding these cases. So we're going to make a law here that it's so circumscribed to the most narrowest of situations that it is impossible to sue for nuisance now. So if you live near a hog farm and there's hog feces on the side of your house, you're out of luck. Too bad. Nothing you can do.
Yep. And
that's the legislature. So that's why seats are important.
Yeah. And just so everyone on this call knows, I voted against both of our farm bills since I've been in the legislature. In part because of that. Other part, these CAFOs, the concentrated animal feeding operations, how they set this system up for the hogs. Every year they find a new way to pretend like they're addressing an issue and then adding a layer of science to it, but they're simply perpetuating the CAFO system that leads to this continued degradation of the soil and the air in the neighboring areas.
And it also emits methane. I mean, even with these so-called biodigesters, there are still significant methane emissions that come from these farms. So all around, it's a huge pollution source.
Right. And, addressing this issue is difficult. I mean, I know the Democrats this year, they put up HB 863, which was a hog lagoon sunset, which is to bring an end to these hog lagoons. It never left the rules. And rules is where you go to send bills to die. And that's immediately where it went. But again, like Lisa said, this is why we want to elect Democrats. We need more numbers. But going from our hog farms, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, Lisa, is our water quality, especially when we're talking about Falls Lake. I was initially thinking of the PFAs, but you mentioned microplastics. Tell me about, first time I'd heard about microplastics.
Well, I just went to a water conference at NC State a couple weeks ago, and I wrote about microplastics afterwards. So I knew what microplastics were. I thought they were an ocean problem. You've heard of the huge garbage patch in the Pacific, which is full of like plastic bags and things. That's called a micro or a macroplastic. You can see those. You can see the bag or the bottle. Microplastics happen when these macros break down into tiny pieces. Your lawn chair outside, the weathering, the ultraviolet light will break down plastics into either, they're called micro, which you can barely see, but you can kind of see, or nano, which are invisible, and they get in the waterways. If you see a plastic bottle in a creek, that's going to break down into microplastics. And why that's important is that gets in the drinking water. We've now found that people are drinking plastics and you're inhaling them. They're been found in sea spray. So when you go to the beach and you're like, oh, this is wonderful, and you feel the spray, well, there's microplastics in the spray. So the reason this is important for environmental reasons is that fish mistake these microplastics for food. So it completely screws up the ecosystem, and they get malnourished because they think they're eating food, but they're actually full of plastic. So you have fisheries as a livelihood that are at risk from microplastics. Then you also have the fact that you're drinking them in your water, and microplastics, obviously, we don't want to be drinking them. So getting rid of, or I should say, reducing as much as possible the single-use plastic is very important, because plastics are getting harder and harder to find somebody that wants to recycle them. And so if you can choose glass, if you can choose metal or, aluminum or steel, or bring your own bag, anything that you can do to reduce your reliance on plastic is a good thing. One of the scientists that spoke at the conference said, every time you pick up a piece of, plastic packaging at the grocery store, you've added to the problem. So, some of it's unavoidable. That's how people package things. But if you can avoid it, please do, because it's a real problem.
Right.
And it's in the Neuse River Basin. That was the point of the study, found it throughout the Neuse River.
Well, there's apparently a lot of things we're finding in the Neuse River Basin. And where I came to this, and what we've discussed a lot this past year, has been the PFAs. Mm-hmm. What exactly are PFAs? And, obviously, don't drink plastic. That sounds like it makes sense. But what are the PFAs going to do to me? Okay. So they're also known for short as Pfas. If you hear the word Pfas, that's what PFAs stand for. And just so you know, they're in Falls Lake. But so PFAS stands for something incredibly long, stands for perfluorinated and polyalkyl fluorocompounds. It's a very long way of saying these are compounds that are not in nature. Like if you have arsenic and maybe in your well, that could be, you shouldn't have it in your well, but it could be from the fact that you live in this lake belt. These are man-made, human-made contaminants. They are the byproducts of making a lot of consumer products. They're found in consumer products. They are found in anything that's, well, I can't say anything, most things that are stain resistant, water resistant, your Gore-Tex, microwave popcorn bags, fast food containers, pizza boxes, Teflon cookware, nonstick cookware. And what happens is that they coat these items to keep them from the grease from getting through, or, to make the water basically run off without getting wet. So there's just enormous amounts of consumer products that have PFAS in them. What happens is that these PFAS have been discharged into the waterways. They have been emitted through smokestacks. Chemours in near Fayetteville is a major discharger, or was at least, of these compounds. Gen X, you might have heard, that's one of them. There are 5,000 types, at least, maybe like 9,000 now, of PFAS. How they affect the human
health is they have been linked to certain cancers, kidney and testicular. They've been connected to thyroid disorders, fetal development issues, reproductive issues, high cholesterol, irritable or ulcerative colitis, depressed immune system. So if, for example, if you have high levels of Pfas in your blood, which people, basically we all have Pfas in our blood, if you've been alive more than like 2 days. And in fact, the mother can pass it to the unborn child in utero. You can have, you know, let's say you had a very high level of Pfas in your blood and then you got a COVID shot. Your COVID shot may not work as effectively because of your Pfas levels in your blood. So it's bad stuff. The science keeps showing how it's worse than we even thought, and it's in our drinking water. And traditional drinking water systems cannot remove it. And these compounds, they're also known as forever chemicals because they will be here for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They don't break down in the environment. So there's many ways they get into the drinking water discharge. For one, sometimes if they've been in the groundwater, they'll get into private drinking wells, or there's often what they call a hydrologic connection. So the groundwater, if it's near a river, for example, near the Cape Fear or the Neuse, it then, you know, travels underwater and gets into the surface water, and then it gets into the drinking water supply. Oddly, they found PFAS in Falls Lake. They found PFAS in Lake Mickey, which is one of the drinking water supplies for Durham. And they're thinking, well, there's no dischargers up there. There's no Comores up in these waters, you know, in that discharge into these waters. So how is it getting in there? Well, now they think when the PFAS leave these these facilities, it goes in the air. It can travel for miles and miles and miles and miles. So they're thinking that it's called atmospheric deposition is the scientific term. So it comes out and it floats on the wind and it goes down into Falls Lake. And then it's in the drinking water supply or where you swim. It also sometimes, when it goes into the drinking water supply, then it also gets into the wastewater treatment plants. And then those wastewater treatment plants often sell that sludge to farms where they then put it on agricultural fields for fertilizer. Well, when that PFAS fertilizer runs off, bingo, back in the drinking water. It's kind of this circular cycle. It's even been found in compost because a lot of wastewater treatment plants take their sludge to compost facilities. I mean, I have personally tested compost or had compost tested and that came from a compost facility in North Carolina that had PFAS in it. So, I mean, we're bathing in it. It's everywhere. The problem is that there's not really, it's unregulated. The EPA is supposed to come out with drinking water regulations soon, but it's not happened. So we're just kind of at the mercy of industry. And, Comores, which is responsible, is under a consent order by the state to stop discharging whatnot. But the horse has left the barn because there's so much of it in the drinking water. So now we have to upgrade the water, the drinking water systems, the city of Raleigh or whatever, so that they can have advanced treatment systems, and you pay for that. The ratepayers bear the burden.
These are forever chemicals. So
yes,
the horse has left the barn literally, and figuratively, in the sense that they're going to be with us now.
Yeah, and the only way to avoid not having them in your drinking water is to there are ways, if not at the treatment plant, you can install a reverse osmosis system on your sink and they will remove them. But, there's a lot of people who don't have that kind of money.
Right. And at the state legislature, the Senate, they put up a PFAS task force as a proposed bill. That went straight to rules. Mm-hmm. In the House, we put forward a bill to address it in firefighting foam, because that's one of the other places you find that in the foam that firefighters use. It passed, I think, unanimously in the House, and then died in the Senate. Apparently, Berger is a big PFAS fan.
Right.
So for whatever reason, it's just not moving, especially in the Senate.
Right. There's a lot of study bills, we're studying, but keeping that firefighting foam out of the waterways would be a really huge deal.
Right. I mean, studying wouldn't be enough, but it's at least a step.
Yeah.
But we can't even get there just yet. Now, I'm cognizant of the time, Lisa.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. It's 8:03 and there's questions in the chat. Okay.
There's questions in the chat, but you and I talked about this earlier. I mean, we can doom and gloom all night.
Oh, longer than that.
there is hope. There is reason to engage because there are things that we can do. I mean, we have Governor Cooper, who has made green energy goals. Mm-hmm. Some of which, if you all looked at the News and Observer over the weekend, some of which we may be able to obtain by, I think his goal date is 2030. Some of which we may get close, but some of which we may fall short, but we would be nowhere near if we didn't try.
Yeah.
What can you tell us?
To make it all feel better so we don't get drunk after this? Yes. Okay. Well, number one, the power of community cannot and organization cannot be underestimated. I have personally witnessed communities, not every time, but many times, more than you think, defeat bad things. There was going to be a facility in a low-income neighborhood in Columbus County named Delco, and they wanted to emit a neurotoxin into the air called methyl bromide. It was part of fumigating logs. Yeah, it was bad. And nobody knew. And then word got out because there was going to be a state permit that was going to have to be granted. And I'm telling you, the community went nuts. They organized. There were hundreds and hundreds of people. It was incredible. It was a really inspiring thing to see. And they fought that plant and it did not open. And in fact, the state tightened its methyl bromide rules after that. They're not eliminated. I mean, you can still emit some, but the rules are stronger. And that's because this community stood up and said, you will not put this neurotoxin in our air. The mine that's happening in Yadkin County right now, it's not happening yet, but it's up for a rezoning so that they can put this big mine at the headwaters of Lake Hampton, near 800 feet from a school. Brilliant. And those folks are very organized. They are fighting it tooth and nail. I don't know if they're going to win, but it's formidable. So this is a long way of saying that I have seen people be successful, but it requires vigilance, not only to keep an eye on things, but interacting with your local officials and interacting with your state officials and keeping the pressure on. Because the other side, the polluting side, they have paid lobbyists to do that. You're not paid, you're volunteers. But there's more of you actually, I think, and if you're retired, you have time on your hands and you can just speed dial all day long. You can just send those emails. So I think making sure that you are heard and that you contact your lawmakers and you let them know where you stand and you contact your county commissioners and even some of these little arcane boards, you'd be amazed. The Planning and Zoning Board is incredibly important. Your Board of Adjustment, incredibly important. That's where the rubber meets the road. And I have seen DEQ make statements publicly that say, especially when it has to do with mines or landfills or, like the Umstead Quarry that was going to be expanded, community fought that down, that you have to fight it at the local level because once it gets to DEQ, they're just going to check boxes. So you really have to fight it on the ground level. And in terms of your lawmakers, you got to, it's not just being against something, but what are you for? What's a proactive bill that you could say, we want protected from this? I think the other thing that's important is that when, to me, when I see people I call it code switching. I mean, it's a common term. It's usually used for race and class, but when you're going before the legislature, the people who are most successful at getting the legislature to listen to them code switch so they speak in kind of legislative language. I've seen people yell and kind of get hysterical at times, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work with certain members of the legislature. Some people, it will pull your heartstrings, but the most entrenched legislators are not going to listen to you. So it's important to show up and speak their language. And you can do it. I've seen it in committees all the time.
I think that's always important. Like when we're talking about the environment, if it's just us, I'm happy to talk about my children and their future and the fact that we can disagree about a million different issues, but if we don't have a place, a planet to disagree with those things on, then it's all kind of moot. And, the other side wants us to believe that this is, just hysterics.
Yeah.
When we know that this is serious life-changing issues, generationally impactful. But when you
bring the science, it's important to bring the reputable science as well.
Right. But it's also important, I think, when talking to Republican colleagues, to code switch in the sense, I think I'm doing this properly. When I talk to them about it, I don't talk about my kids. I talk about how much money we can make when we're talking about investments in green technology, because somebody is going to be doing it. The rest of the world's already there. Mm-hmm. Somebody's going to make money off of it. Why aren't we? Why aren't we investing in that so North Carolina can bring in that revenue? Mm-hmm. Germany, France, the rest of Europe, the rest of the country, they're already there.
Yeah.
They're going to make money off of this. Why can't we? Because they're going to be buying. We should be selling.
Yeah. Do you want to get to the questions in the chat?
Sure.
Do you think you should do that?
Keep me on track, Lisa.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just looking. I don't know. I'm just like, I see these, they're piling up, and I want to be able to answer as many as possible. Is that okay?
Yeah, and you know the answer, so you go.
Okay.
Right.
So can we take a quick call to action break so we can get folks, if they're ready to commit to fight for these issues, that they can sign up. And then we have plenty more time to talk. So thank you for letting me do this. But we just want to pause to give you a chance to sign up to talk to key voters in key districts like Representative Everitt's district, so that we can elect Democrats to fight for the issues that we really care about. This is how we can take action. So right now we're focusing on protecting 3 incumbents, 2 in Wake and 1 in Alamance. And in addition to Representative Everitt in the northern part of Wake, Senator Sidney Batch in the southern part, and Representative Rick Hurtado in Alamance County. They all have very tight races, and they're also just wonderful people. We need to keep them in office. If you're new to all this, we encourage you to commit to 1 action, either phone banking or canvassing. And if you've done this before, we encourage you to pick 2 per month if you can, because this early voter contact is really critical. And while you're at it, you can sign up for our next 2 meetings, which is an important part of our organization building. On April 30th, we're having an in-person gathering in Chatham County in the Briar Chapel neighborhood, and we'll be outside with coffee and bagels, and House Minority Leader Robert Reeves will be there to talk with us about the election. And many of you who've been with NOC for a while, this event is a really great opportunity for you to help us build up our ranks if you live in the Triangle area. So please bring a friend, because the word of mouth, that's our absolute best recruiting tool for Neighbors on Call and talking to more voters. And on May 18th, we're going to have our next virtual event with Nancy McLean, who's the author of Democracy in Chains, and she'll be talking with us about what the radical right is really up to and what we can do about it. So please go to Neighbors on Call right now to sign up while the conversation continues. The link is going to be in the chat. And when you click RSVP on the website, it takes you to another page that lists all the RSVP links, and it goes to a second page. So just note that it continues on. And thank you very much for doing that. So the link should be in the chat. And now I pass it back to you, Lisa.
Okay.
And Representative Everitt. Thank you.
Well, the first question is, are DEQ EPA leaders appointed? If so, by whom? So on the state level, the governor appoints the Secretary of the Environment. Earlier this year, or last year, 2021, his Governor Cooper's first nominee was rejected. And that's the first time that maybe has ever happened. And that's because there were lawmakers who were trying to push natural gas pipelines, and they didn't like Governor Cooper's first nominee, the fact that she was non-committal on that. She didn't, she wasn't fossil fuel loving enough for them. And so they rejected her. Another example of why lawmakers are important. So we now have a different DEQ secretary that was approved. Her name is Elizabeth Beiser. She then appoints people under her, and then the rank and file is, just scientists that are hired normally. EPA, the president, Biden, he appointed former Secretary Regan as EPA administrator, and then there are other appointments in there, but the scientists are hired through a usual rank and file. Department of Agriculture, this is where you matter. Again, that is currently, the commissioner is Steve Troxler. He's been the commissioner since the earth cooled. He is elected. He is an elected official. So that's where your vote counts. To give you an example, he's very pro hog farm. He's, he's very much into industrialized agriculture. It was under his leadership that the state fair, which is under the Department of Agriculture, clear cut 19 acres of forest in Raleigh for a parking lot. And, hurt some waterways. So that's that, blah, blah, blah. Environmental advocacy organizations. There are many. There is Clean Water for North Carolina. There is, of course, the Sierra Club. There is the Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League. I can send this a list actually out afterward. So there are a lot of great environmental groups. The Southern Environmental Law Center is a law firm that represents a lot of folks. So there are a lot of people on the front lines working. The North Carolina Environmental Justice Network. So lots of people. OWASA, good to know. I'm going to save that. Pfas, besides sunset for the hog lagoons, are there other specific bills before the legislature? I don't know if there's anything. I mean, you're back in session in mid-May, Representative Everett?
Yeah.
So I don't know what, there'll be something up their sleeve. I don't know what yet.
Yeah, I mean, as far as legislation to stop them, I'm not aware of anything. I mean, we know where they're going to go. The Republicans have no interest in even entertaining this. Could the Republicans make things worse? I mean, we haven't found the basement yet.
Right.
So we keep waiting. But we have nothing on the table right now that I'm aware of.
Okay. Where is a good place to have your drinking water tested? Someplace that does not have some machinery to sell you. Excellent. I had my drinking water tested. You can call Pace Labs. Pace Labs is an EPA approved laboratory. They have a drop-off site in Raleigh, actually. So you can call them and say, I want to test my drinking water. There'll be a charge depending on what you want to test for. And then you can go and you pick up the kit and you can ask them, how do I do this? Should I do the first flush in the morning? Anything like that. And so that is one place if you wanted to test it yourself. If you have a private well, there are, and I can send all of this out in an email. There are Clean Water for North Carolina can help you test your well. The health department will test your well. And, they're not there to sell you machinery. So those are, and then there's a UNC Institute for the Environment, I believe. Maybe it's the Superfund Research Center. Anyway, I know the person over there, and they also do private well testing. So I can send those resources out in an email to the organizers, and then you can spread it around. What do you do with the used filter? Yeah, the RO system. Yes, those have, that's the problem with the RO systems, the reverse osmosis, is that they capture the contaminants and then you got to do something with them. I mean, Probably the best place for them actually is the landfill, because at least the landfill is lined. You don't want to put them, you know, anywhere where they would be in a situation where it wouldn't be lined. How hard is it to install RO? Well, I mean, you can, I don't have any body to recommend, but if you contact Clean Cape Fear, which is a group in Wilmington, they are reputable environmental activists, and they can tell you how to, some reputable companies that can put RO systems on your sink. If we had a school, oh yeah, polystyrene from schools. And I think that is it. The last thing that I would add is that if you see foam in Falls Lake or anywhere in waterways, you know, it kind of looks like shaving cream, or don't touch it. It might have PFAS in it. There's been a lot of sightings and testing of PFAS foam that has formed in waterways. Sometimes it's innocuous, sometimes it's not. So don't let your pets near it, and don't touch it yourself. Is there anything else? Could the RO, yeah, you could take the RO filters to household hazardous waste. Yes.
Susan Lindsay, who's on our leadership team, has also been monitoring the chat. So Susan, let us know if you see any other questions from way back.
Susan, you're muted. Susan Lindsay.
One question was asked, how can PFAS pollution be addressed by legislation?
Oh, right. So, I mean, we can't take it out of the water now, but we can stop more of it from going in. So the bill that Representative Everitt mentioned was to ban the manufacture in North Carolina and the import of it, because we import it from the Netherlands even. So to basically not add to our problem. So banning the import of it from out of state or other countries, and banning any kind of manufacturing of it that could be happening in North Carolina, and also requiring that the firefighting foam be phased out in North Carolina, because there are alternatives now to the firefighting foam that contains PFAS. So that, I don't know if you all remember the Colonial Pipeline disaster in Huntersville a few years ago. There's still a mystery about that, in that what happens when you have, there was an emergency response, and there somehow PFAS got introduced into the environment. Colonial says that the foam they used to keep the gasoline from igniting had no PFAS in it, but yet it was detected. So we don't know where it came from. But another source of PFAS is when you have petroleum contaminated soil, like in a Colonial Pipeline situation, or an underground storage tank that leaks, and if there's foam used to keep that from igniting, that material actually goes to a field. There are companies that have permits, and they take petroleum contaminated soil and they put it out on farm fields, and they let it do whatever it does. Oh. Basically, it evaporates or biodegrades. But in the meantime, that PFAS that's in some of that was used to keep it from catching on fire then gets into the waterways. And there is some thought that that might have happened in Cleveland County, because it wasn't near any kind of manufacturing site, but it was near one of those application fields that had taken soil from Colonial Pipeline.
Another thing that the legislature could do is, you know, DEQ's budget has been slashed over the last decade. We could actually hire people to help us keep track of where we're having PFAS issues and other environmental situations. You know, actually hire the scientists we need. Right. Another issue is studying how to address this issue, coming up with effective means to address it. And again, this goes back to the economic argument of what if we develop a really sound way of addressing this issue that we can sell to others? Because this isn't strictly a North Carolina issue. These are all opportunities for us to do better, not just in North Carolina, but throughout the country and throughout the world.
Right.
We need legislators who are willing to make those investments and to have that kind of vision.
There was a question. I would like Lisa to tell us if there was one thing each of us could do to make a difference, what would she suggest? Wow. Well, for one thing, we all have, an individual buying habits that we can do. But we can only turn off so many lights and, turn the heat down so far, or not buy plastic. But I think the best thing that you could do, and this is to the follow-up, is tell your neighbors. Spread the word about these environmental threats, because I think one thing that's important is once people find out about this stuff, they are, as you say, outraged. Once they have the knowledge, they're like, what? You're kidding. You mean I'm inhaling microplastics at the beach and I can't touch the phone? People get really upset about that sort of things, but they just don't know. And that's because there's, a million things to keep track of. People have kids, they are caregivers, whatever. So I think if you have something that you can tell your next door neighbor next time you see them, or, a coworker or whatever, is just to spread the word about maybe a pet environmental issue that you have and that you think people need to know about, because outrage will work. Once people find out, even if I've talked to people who are not on the same political side as I am, even in Yadkin County, for example, a lot of Trump signs, but you talk to them about the mine and they don't care about whether it's Trump or Biden anymore. It's about, is this mine going to be blasting while my child's at West Yadkin Elementary School? And they're outraged and it doesn't matter anymore. So it just, once it hits home, then people get motivated.
Isabel, I love that question. And it reminds me, I mentioned this to Lisa earlier today. And I know this is going to sound doom and gloom, but it's not. It's actually what gets me through some of these frustrating issues. It's the idea that nothing we do matters. So the only thing that matters is what we do. And that's the only thing that we can do. And so, when we get up in the morning, it's not fixing the world. It's what can I do today? Whether it's this one environmental act I can take, or it's, volunteering on Terence Everitt's campaign, whatever it may be. What is the thing that I can do? I just think that's just a wonderful question.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, one day at a time, and no gesture is too small. You don't know what the ripple effects will be. Mm-hmm. So don't ever feel like what you do doesn't matter, because it really does. It matters, in a very tactile and concrete way, but it also matters. And I'm not a super religious person, but I do believe in the interconnectivity of all living things. So what are you going to do to help that connection strengthen and be healthy today? I'm going to plant some pollinators in my garden and the bees will have something to eat, you don't have to, outlaw plastic bags. That would be a great thing. Remember a few years ago, there was a plastic bag ban on the coast. And then when the legislature flipped and had the supermajority, they rolled that back and now there is no ban. And there should be plastic bags banned on the coast. In fact, everywhere, in my opinion, but especially on the coast. So that's an example of legislation that I would love to see happen again. But just, I guess the takeaway is no act of goodness and kindness is too small for the environment, because it needs you.
Ann and David asked why Republicans make the making money argument, like how they rely on just that. And Lisa, I know you've talked to quite a few Republicans over the years. Some of them are strictly, yes, this is a financial decision. I believe that some of them actually believe what they're saying, that, you know, protecting these hog farms is for the greater good. I think they're wrong. As close to knowing something, know they're wrong. To the extent that we can convince them, we should. To the extent that we can't, we just beat them. But I don't think they have, it's hard, as tempting as it is to paint our Republican friends as a monolith. Some of them actually believe it, that they are with the greater good. They're just wrong though.
Representative Everitt, on that note, I would like to highlight that we will be working with you on 3 upcoming dates, and that folks can jump in and help you on May 7th, which is a Saturday, very soon. We'll be canvassing with you in Wake Forest, and then phone banking with you Monday, May 9th, and phone banking again on Thursday, May 2nd.
June.
June, thank you. Very, very concrete ways that we can jump in and help keep you in office to fight for these issues.
I appreciate it. And for all of you on the call, Wake Forest is a lovely place to walk around and not bucolic.
I can testify to that.
There was a question, one last question about OWASA.
Yes.
Susan, did you want to tee that up for me, Susan Lindsay?
Sure. OWASA is evidently considering changing from deep water supply to Jordan Lake water. And they don't intend to compare the 2 sources for PFAS. And James Edo as asking, as an elected representative and as residents, what are the questions we should be asking? Because OWASA is going to be doing a presentation at the Chapel Hill Library. James Edo, do you know exactly the date of that? If you could put that in the chat. But anyway, that's the question. What kinds of questions should we be asking?
I would ask I would say, well, where are the test results for PFAS? And also, and this is another chemical that is a mouthful, 1,4-dioxane. And that's what, James, I think you're referring to in your question. There was a chemical release from Greensboro. They have had a huge problem. And 1,4-dioxane is also not regulated in drinking water. It is almost certain to cause cancer, or linked to cancer, I should say. And Greensboro keeps discharging it illegally, and that's a whole other story. But it gets into the Pittsburgh, it goes down into the Haw River, and it enters Jordan Lake. It contaminates Pittsburgh's drinking water, contaminates Jordan Lake. Now, Jordan Lake tends to dilute it, but if you're on the western side, it's not going to be diluted on that side. So I think you should ask for the science, the test results of PFAS and 1,4-dioxane, and ask them, how are they going to remove it? If they say they are, what is the treatment? And you know, as we say, bring the receipts. And who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for if they say they're going to install a treatment system, how is that being paid for? So bring the science and bring the finances. And if you can't, then why are we doing this?
Thank you. So that's this Saturday.
This Saturday, okay. At the Chapel Hill Library. I need to go to that. Okay.
Presentation is at 1 o'clock.
All right. I'm putting that on my calendar right now because that sounds important.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much for taking our questions. It is 8:30, so we need to wrap up. And really, we're so grateful to both of you, Representative Everitt and Lisa. Thank you for being here and educating us and motivating us. And Representative Everitt, we'll see you soon. And Lisa, will follow you on Twitter and read your articles. And thank you so much for going to the library on Saturday.
Okay,
Yep.
well, I will be there. Thanks for letting me know.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you all.
Thanks, everybody.